Hey, in this video we're going to go ahead and look at how we can use Chromote, which is a way of interacting with the Chromium line of web browsers through Chrome DevTools Protocol to scrape a website that has its content dynamically generated by JavaScript. Which means that if we tried to directly download the HTML page and then scrape that HTML page, there would be content that's missing because the page first has to be rendered by a web browser, and then we can actually extract the information from it afterwards. So with that being said, another part about this video that I have to emphasize is the example that I'm going to use for the second part is basically a little bit more complicated than it needs to be, but one of my students today decided that they wanted to give me a true challenge when I asked for a website that they would like to see get scraped. And just to give you a little bit of a preview, right, that website is windy.com, and you can see it's a really cool weather-based website, and we can see different kinds of weather patterns right now alongside of temperature. So again, that's sort of where we're at. So without further ado, let's actually slowly start to get into the main part of the video. Now, on the left-hand side, you see a Firefox browser. And you can tell that it's Firefox because up above, it says Firefox. And then when I went to click About, it's Firefox. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to close out of this browser by going Command Q. And it's basically saying exit, Firefox. So if I go down below, notice I have absolutely no web browsers open. Firefox isn't open or anything like that. So the next part here that I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and use R to trigger a web browser like Chrome, and I'm going to go and control it from R using Chromote. All right. It's very important, though, before we begin all of this, that you have some kind of Chrome or Chromium browser installed. And you also will need a few packages R-related, like Chromote, rvest, lubridate, and dplyr. So with that said, let's go ahead and just load in some of our packages. Next, what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to go and launch a new browser session. So here I'm going to run this line of code, which effectively now over on the far right-hand side, you can see in our little bit of an environment, right? We now have this Chrome session environment. And if I click on that, you can see that a lot of the Chrome developer protocol kind of functionality is built right into that object. But what's really interesting and useful in this particular case, right, is the fact that when we're trying to look at this website and extract things from it, we can actually have the web browser open at the same time. So here, if I go ahead and I press View, you'll notice immediately on the left-hand side, we now have an open web browser with Chrome, and it's loaded into an empty page. So just to sort of show a little bit about this web browser that we just opened, I'm going to pick up the version information using getVersion. And you can see here we have the protocol, it's a headless version of Chrome, and what our user agent is and things along those lines. So the next part here is we're actually going to control the browser from R using Chromote, and we're going to do that by issuing a navigation command. So here you're going to notice that instead of being at the About blank page, we're going to take Chrome and we're going to direct it right at the R project website. So once I press Command Enter, you'll notice it takes about 1 to 2 seconds or so. And then on the left-hand side, we can now see that the R project website has been loaded. Usually, if you're trying to run a script like this multiple times over, you're going to have to put in some wait steps. I personally have a tendency to just use something like system sleep, which means that if I go ahead and I run it for like 0.5 of a second, you'll notice that it just took a little bit of time for the input tab to return inside of the R console. So cool. What we've ended up doing so far is we've opened a web browser, we've navigated to the R web page, but we haven't actually done anything where we're pulling data out of the page. So first, what I should mention here is we can identify sort of a piece of information that's of interest using what's known as the developer tools. So over here, you can see that there's this little clicky button that allows you to inspect the page. If we go ahead and click it, what happens is the icon turns from gray to blue, and as we mouse over the page, we now actually see what part of the HTML source is responsible for rendering that particular element on the page. So over here, if I go ahead and click on Getting Started, I can see inside of the source view that it's an H2 header tag, and this header tag has a unique identifier of Getting Started. Now, I don't have to actually use that little icon. I can really quickly move my mouse up and down the source itself. And if I have another piece of the page I'm interested in, let's say the sidebar, I can go ahead and click on that sidebar. And what'll happen here is that sidebar will then be selected. And then what I can do is I can generate a unique identifier by going down to the copy menu and then say copy selector. Now, that selector over here is really long. So it's, body, div row, div column. It's very much so a bootstrap kind of grid. Realistically, it shouldn't, I think, be like a sidebar class. It should just be an ID. But for all intents and purposes, I don't really think that we need here the left-hand side. So I'm just going to use .sidebar to very quickly retrieve the sidebar on the left-hand side of the R project webpage. So let's go ahead now and emphasize that. So here, if I run this next portion, which I couldn't figure out how nicely to actually highlight the node from R, so I'm using a little bit of JavaScript here inside of a runtime evaluate. So if we go ahead and run this part of the code, you can now see that that area that before, when we moused over the HTML source was highlighted, now is permanently highlighted with a yellow background and a red outline. We're going to sort of take a screenshot of that area along with our modification. And the next part that we're going to do, you can see if I gently refresh my directory, I now have this r-project-sidebar. I'm going to go ahead and say browse URL. And lo and behold, when I browse that URL, I now just get a sliver of our web page with the modification that we made to sort of emphasize that, hey, this was the element that we selected. So I'm going to go ahead and gently close preview. And then what I'm going to do down below is I'm going to now use Chromote to retrieve the sidebar content and bring it into R. So here, if we go ahead and run this query selector, we're going to select the node that has the sidebar class. And once we have that sidebar class, we're then going to get the HTML out of it by using, again, this node value. So if I very quickly type node into terminal, you can see that we have a node ID of 30 inside of the page. So using that node ID of 30, I'm going to now go ahead and retrieve the HTML content. And we can see that the HTML content truly is HTML content that's being returned inside of a list. So when we move now to use rvest, on this content, what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to access the list element here, so $, outer HTML. We're going to pipe it right now into a minimal HTML document. So this basically means that we're going to take this small code snippet that we had of just the sidebar, and we're going to put it into a valid HTML document that has a header and a body component. Then what we're going to do in the next step here is we're going to pull all of the links. So we're going to retrieve all of the anchor tags. And once we retrieve all of the anchor tags, the next thing here is just to maybe retrieve all of the text. So what text is being written on the sidebar? And we can do that by using HTML text, which over here is basically taking the content that's in between the two, or the opening and then the closing HTML tags. Okay, so realistically, what we did here is a little bit of an overkill with Chromote. So what we're going to do next is something that definitely requires Chromote, and that is we're going to attempt to scrape the website that the student suggested. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open a new tab in our Chrome session. So we're just going to create a new session, and then we're going to open the view. So just like before, we started off at an empty page. We can navigate to the one website the student suggested. So over here, right, you can see windy.com. If you're running, again, the script very quickly, that sys.sleep should hopefully give enough time for the web page to load. This is a little bit resource intensive, so just keep that in mind. If we go down a little bit more, one of the things here that's really useful when you're trying to scrape a website that has a bunch of dynamic content is you want to be able to supply your own sort of search terms. So you can see up at the top left, it basically says where I'm located right now, which is Sunnyvale. And it's a search bar, which means that if we click in it, what we can do is we can change the location and get weather information elsewhere. So what I'm going to very quickly do is I'm going to focus that search bar. Again, this is using a little bit of JavaScript to identify and then trigger the focus event. I'll have a nice brief pause to make sure that it gets triggered. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a search query. So this search query is going to let me look at different locations or different places because I'm currently teaching a course at Stanford. One quick way of finding the weather here is by looking at the weather associated with the Stanford University Museum of Art. So if we go ahead and we run that search query, right, we now have that string loaded. And next, what we need to do is we need to pretend like we're a user, and we need to have Chromote type it into that search area. So the next part here is sort of me running through a lot of different and interesting JavaScript ways of triggering a send event, because this isn't necessarily a traditional form that windy.com has. So if we go ahead and run the next portion, what you'll end up seeing is you'll see Stanford University Museum of Art get typed in, and then you'll see that it gets submitted. So now underneath, right, you can see that there's this little hidden text called Stanford University Museum of Art, California, United States that appeared. The next part that we're going to do is we're going to click on that first link to effectively bring up a weather forecast. So you can see down below, we now have this weather forecast that appears. After we do this, it really sort of goes back to being a more natural problem of looking for the identifier that we want. in order to extract the information from. Previously, a lot of what you saw was way more advanced than you'll need usually, but for this particular site, again, those advanced techniques and how we're triggering it definitely were required. So for here, what we're going to do, just to sort of emphasize again how we can find these elements, is we're going to go back to the input selector, click it to enable it. Notice that it's blue. And then what we're going to do is go directly down to where you see the table of weather forecasts. And if we select that, right, we can see over here that there's this table ID, detail-data-table. And if we right click, go down to copy, and then say copy selector, we now have here just, hashtag detail-data-table, because an ID here again is basically signaling there's only one HTML element on the entire web page. This is sort of a unique selector. So here, we're going to now go ahead and basically extract out all of that HTML. So if I look at the HTML for the table, again, it's pretty intense. There's a lot going on here because you have images, you have a heat map in the background, you have a way of changing the information, you name it. But bottom line, we now have HTML text, and with this HTML text, what we want to do is we want to convert it into a data frame. So the next part here is we're going to go ahead and take the HTML, we're going to pipe it directly into rvest read HTML, then we're going to select out the node, then we're going to use HTML table to coerce the table node into a data frame, which in this case it'll be a gentle tibble, and then from there I'll switch it very quickly back to a proper base R data frame. So if we just gently run the first line, right, we can see that we've added here a HTML document around our table. Then we're going to just pick out here that table node. And when we have the table node, the next part here is we're just, running HTML table. Again, this is giving us a tibble as the output. And I'm going to force it to, in this case, give a data frame. So you can see overall, right, what's happening here is we don't actually have any variable headers for our variables in the table. They're all underneath. And then the next part that we have is, sort of the time information from where all of this is being taken. We have here the temperature, and then we start to get down into wind speed, and then I think the next one is wind gusts, and then we have another one which I think is wind direction. I'm not entirely sure where the 4 is coming from, but we'll see that a little bit later on in the cleaning. So overall, we now should have this raw weather table that's just sitting as a data frame. The next part here is coming up with a cleaning function. So here, this is just a very quick cleaning function that will hopefully give us, the correct output that we were looking for. So running that cleaning function, we end up getting here the cleaned weather data frame. And if I very quickly switch into the interactive viewer, right, we can see the temperature in Fahrenheit, we can see wind speed in knots, we can see the Beaufort, so that was where the 4 was coming from. Then we can see the time, the day number, and a proper date time. alongside of, wind speed and wind gusts in miles per hour, and then temperature in Celsius instead of Fahrenheit. So again, I would say that this has managed to successfully extract highly dynamic data and bring it into R, all through Chromote. I suppose one other thing that we could very quickly do is we could just sort of get a summary of a few different columns. So here, right, the average temperature that we captured is going to be about 56.2 degrees Fahrenheit for the Stanford area over the next few days. The maximum wind speed is going to be 35.7 miles per hour, and then the max wind gust is about 48.3. So it's going to be really windy. Make sure not to wear a hat, I suppose. And then our average Beaufort is just 4. Okay, so with that being said, again, we've managed to successfully take a highly dynamic web page, bring the data into R. The next part here is just really cleaning everything up. So what we're going to do is we're going to clean our sessions, and we're going to close out of our browser. So we're going to close, again, our connection to the windy website. And then we're going to close our connection with the web, or with the R project website. And lo and behold, it's all done. And that is how we can use R and Chromote to web scrape highly dynamic data. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you in the next video. Bye now.